$900,000 next year. Yeah. So if it were 950,000, it would make sense. Anyway, let it be. I think
Hello.
is for people. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Kumar. Hello. Hello, Nija.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, Mahfouz.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Very
Can
good
you
to see
hear
you
me?
again.
Yes.
Hi, Kumar. Hi, Mahfouz. Hi,
Hi
Nija.
everyone.
Video stopped.
Thanks for that.
So we are live anytime now. Hello, Patricia. And we are live anytime now. I think now Sanjoy can.
Well, I'm waiting
ahead.
for Sandeep Dixit to just join us. He also was waiting for his connection, and Beena Sarwar says that we have a flight passing overhead, which is like once in a month. I don't know what that is. Must be an evacuation flight. So, what I was saying is that I hope Sandeep Dixit has joined us or is joining us soon, because he's on the first panel. So Eric, sorry to have kept you waiting, but my apologies. I was, Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will possibly go wrong, but here we are. Once, perhaps we could start anyway. Aditya, are we on?
Yeah, we're live, sir.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to this first edition, really, of this a webinar of this sort that we've done on media freedom. Today is World Media Freedom Day. My name is Sanjoy Hazarika. I'm the Executive International Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative and co-convener of what's called SAMDEN, the South Asia Media Defenders Network, of which several members are on the panel and co-conveners. And the CHRI works on issues of human rights and access to justice and information, and now more increasingly freedom of expression and opinion. SAMDEN was started about 2.5 years ago to in a way rise up and mobilize people who felt the sting of discrimination, violence, and threats themselves, editors and media professionals. And today we have more than 50 professional editors, broadcasters, bloggers across South Asia and beyond, including Europe and Australia. That's a bit about us, and I'm going to the reason we're having this is that it is World Press Freedom Day. It is a time when we honor those journalists and media professionals who have fallen in the line of duty, who've been brutally murdered, intimidated, beaten up, arrested, detained. We call from this platform for the release of all journalists who are in detention today and who are facing trial or threat by trial, including some who are on the panel. And we urge all to honor the colleagues who are fighting, in a way, the good fight, because in honoring them, we honor each other. We are very happy to have a very distinguished panel, whom I'll introduce a bit later on. But initially, we're going to have, we have the privilege of hearing from Eric Falt, who is a senior official with the United Nations and currently the director of the UNESCO group at the UNESCO cluster office, the UNESCO representative at the UNESCO cluster office in New Delhi. He has spent 28 years in the world of diplomacy and international affairs, served in UNESCO, of course, and with the Department of Public Information of the UN in New York. It is very early for him. We got to him very late in terms of the invitation, but he very patiently and graciously has agreed to deliver opening remarks, and we are very happy to have him on board. Thank you, Mr. Falt, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, and good morning to all of you. We have gathered today virtually, like literally thousands of others around the world, to celebrate World Press Freedom Day. And every year on the 3rd of May, we come together to celebrate the fundamental principles of press freedom, take stock of freedom of expression around the world, and as you have said, Sanjay, pay tribute to journalists who have faced attacks or lost their lives while exercising their profession. Freedom of the press and freedom of expression is at the core of UNESCO's mandate. And every year on this date, we take the lead in the celebration of World Press Freedom Day because we firmly believe that a free press allows for mutual understanding to build a sustainable peace. The global theme for this year's celebration is journalism without fear or favor. And this year, unfortunately, we have to add COVID-19 to the list of threats that reporters are facing. And it was, of course, very timely that you would focus more specifically this seminar on media at the time of the pandemic. We are facing unprecedented, never seen before circumstances where the entire world is grappling with the challenges posed by the novel coronavirus, and journalists are at the forefront reporting on the health crisis. A free and independent press is obviously essential at all times, but it is particularly important during a health crisis like the one we are facing currently. And if we look more generally, I think this year, unfortunately, has already been a difficult one. When I say this year, that I'm referring at the time since World Press Freedom Day last year. We do support a report by the International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, which is issued independently today, but with financial support from UNESCO. And it has underlined a high level of threats, intimidation, and attacks on media persons and their organizations in this region. If we look back at April 2012, when the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the Issue of Impunity was launched, and again, UNESCO is at the lead of this UN Plan of Action, very little has changed for journalists in the South Asia region in terms of their safety. It is clearly one of the most dangerous places for journalists in the world, and it continues to be extremely unsafe for the press. As you will see in this report that is launched by IFJ, there are other figures, but I think they all correlate. There were at least 16 media workers who lost their lives in the region in the last 12 months. And too many violations of media rights. And we see also new forms of intimidation, including incitement to hostility and intimidation via digital channels and digital media, where in particular, I want to point out the fact that women journalists are subjected to attack and others, including, for instance, artists. So these are clearly deeply disturbing figures which attest to the fact that much still needs to be done to ensure the safety of journalists and end impunity for crimes against journalists. The media in the times of this COVID pandemic has to battle also a major challenge, which is posed by the phenomena of misinformation and disinformation. And here I want to say that misinformation, even when harmless, disrupts the flow of genuine information and makes people susceptible to manipulation. So it is important in our view to underline that no crisis can be resolved without accurate and reliable information. And today, UNESCO is also unveiling the latest data from our 2020 World Trends Report on media independence and press freedoms in times of COVID-19. This provides an analysis of the situation and examines the information landscape during the pandemic. You will see, for instance, that the report points out to research showing astonishing numbers. For instance, We show in the report that nearly 42% of over 178 million tweets related to COVID-19 worldwide were produced by bots, and that 40% of these messages were unreliable. So quite clearly, we need to come together at all levels, governments to individuals, and of course, involving the media itself, so that because the decisions we can make today are a matter, can be a matter of life and death, and must be based on facts and science. So it is only through a joint multilateral coordination that these crucial issues can successfully be addressed. And we are, as I said, at UNESCO, deeply committed to this global effort. And I'm very happy to respond to your call to be part of your event this morning. And just to conclude, I want to share special thoughts for Colombian journalist Gineth Bedoya Lima, who has been named the laureate of our 2020 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize. She was selected on the recommendation of an independent international jury of media professionals who noted her outstanding courage and untiring commitment to uncovering issues of fundamental importance to the society. I'm mentioning her, and it can seem very far away from India and the region, but to talk about Gineth Bedoya Lima and to talk also about the many journalists in South Asia who have faced threats and retaliation is to talk about the fight against impunity, which affects the freedom of the press and violates principles of freedom of expression. So this fight to strengthen the media must go on, and I want to wish all of you, despite the difficult topics that you will discuss, a happy World Press Freedom Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Falk, for those remarks, because they set the framework and the tone for our three panel discussions today. And all the issues that you've discussed, whether it is the violence that journalists face, the health crisis that is affecting all of us and our work, our lives, our families, our friends and colleagues, the issue of fake news, and the concerns about how to connect with people and make sure that we provide stable and fact-checked information all the time. These are difficult times, and they're getting even more challenging with pressures on the net and on, as you said, on digital media, especially as far as women journalists and women journalists in particular are concerned. Along with you, we honor the Colombia and extend our respect to the Colombian journalist who has been awarded this remarkable recognition for her stellar work, and please convey that from SAMDEN and the participants here. Thank you, and I'd like to go now to our first panel, which is on the health of the media. And we have really the 10 media professionals who are on this discussion are stars. It's not just Rajdeep Sardesai who will be joining us in a short while, but we have international figures like Kanak Dixit, who's the founder and editor of Himal South Asian. We have Mahfouz Anam, who's really the founding editor of Bangladesh's finest English language paper. And we have Patricia Mukim, who has faced violence and threats for her outstanding reporting and editorial positions in her paper, The Shillong Times. For the first panel, we have three fine panelists. Each will have 5 to 6 minutes each. There will be a timekeeper. And the first, of course, is Mahfouz Anam, the editor of the Daily Star from Bangladesh, who is a co-convener of SAMDEN. After him will come Amitabh Sinha, a veteran journalist and now editor of the Indian Express based in Pune. And then the third panelist on the first panel will be Sandeep Dixit, who is associate editor of the Tribune in Chandigarh and has been, like all of us, a journalist for, well, let's say more than 2 decades, that's putting it mildly. So, Mahfouz, over to you. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning, everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. May I I must put on record our appreciation also to News Laundry, who's our official partner. I'm sorry, this has come a bit late. Who's our official partner for this event, which is being live streamed. And participants, although they can't interact with us on Zoom because this is a closed room, will be able to write in on the YouTube chat channel. So yeah, over to you, Mahfouz. I'm sorry for that.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Go ahead. Everybody can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Nobody will interrupt.
Okay.
Yeah, five minutes.
So good morning and a very happy Press Freedom Day. I think it has to be confined to only wishing, because the reality on the ground is quite different. I think from where I sit, it looks like the governments are getting more stringent. They're using the COVID, if you like, environment, which is very restrictive, to further restrict the press, and the excuse is to prevent misinformation. Only yesterday, 3 journalists were sent to jail by a magistrate because one police officer complained that he was quoted in a news without being contacted. So we don't know the other side of the story, the journalist side, but they are already in jail as of last night. And then there are many other instances. So happy Press Freedom Day only in our wishes, but not on the ground. I feel that, you see, through this COVID thing, the capacity of the governments to control the society has increased. I mean, you can shut down the whole society, and the whole idea of, tracing a COVID, say, infected person gives the government huge surveillance ability, which is frightening. I mean, in a way, we want the COVID to be contained, but the mechanism which is evolving in this time will haunt us for years to come, because the governments, the intelligence agencies will have the capacity to monitor each and every citizen. I don't know how it plays out in the future. I think definitely it is a serious concern for the freedom of the press. Now, on the COVID situation, the health of the media, I would like to first address the issue from the perspective of the journalists themselves. I think we are into a very absurd situation where journalists, instead of being able to go all over the place to meet their contacts, to go on the spot, to discover new stories, travel all over the place, we are now on an opposite trajectory where confinement is the order of the day. So, and we have to provide protection for our journalists, which is all very good. In the Daily Star, we have basically totally decentralized our operation. We work from home. We have given them as much protective gear as is necessary. So in terms of protecting them, I think we have taken the right step. But there is an inevitable price to pay in terms of quality of journalism, because sitting at home, making on limited contacts, the reporting is far more official, notification based, far more, I mean, when journalists cannot go to the field to examine what's going on, obviously journalism suffers. So from that angle, while we have taken good measure to protect them health-wise, I think journalism is suffering. The business model, which I think is a very serious concern. You see, freedom of the press is fine, but if press doesn't exist, then where does freedom go? And what I mean by this is that the model of the print media is totally in shambles. Circulation has dropped. Advertisement is next to zero. So how do we exist? Now, in many places, journalists are looking at the government for handouts, which will have its implicit impact on the freedom side. So I really don't know what is the future. Say for my paper, um, for the next 3 months, the salaries of the staff will be a very big issue. I'll have to borrow from the banks or from my investors to pass this time. So, and then there will be inevitable pay cuts, retrenchment. Many television stations in Bangladesh have started retrenching people, and then the 2 newspapers have already ceased
Mahfouz, I'll have to ask you to wrap up because we will have to give the others. I'm conscious of the fact we are sliding a split late, but please wrap up with your last.
Yeah, I'm wrapping it up. So basically, I think one of the fundamental challenges we face is rediscovering our existence in the post-COVID time, which will include digitalization, new form of business, new form of journalism as such. So this is a very, I would say a very serious challenge lies ahead for press, particularly the print media in the coming days. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you very much, Mahfouz. Sorry to hurry you along, but I think you raised a very fundamental question on the capacity of the press as it exists to survive. You know, what kind of economic model? I know of many journalists and media houses, whether small or large, are letting people go. Or giving them the golden handshake or whatever it is. And this has been a process over the past years, but it seems to have become more active now. And whether there will be a new form of journalism or old forms of journalism reviving and becoming better and smarter, I want to turn to Amitabh Sinha right now, the editor of the Indian Express based in Pune, because we've been talking about this a bit and how the Express, which has done, I think, a remarkable job of reporting from the field across the country through all its editions, has been keeping its head above water and keeping people informed. Amitabh, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Mahfouz has already flagged 2 of the challenges that COVID has presented before the media, and I speak from the limited perspective of my experience in print media. And those 2 challenges are, one, of course, here are our revenue streams, which are at the best of times very fragile. They have been disrupted very badly. Newspapers, we have had to shut down because of the lockdown. We have had to shut down the printing of our newspapers in at least 3 centers for some time. We are back now, especially in Bombay and Pune. We had to shut down quite early, also because a lot of residential societies in these cities, they had started refusing newspapers in their localities, saying newspapers can also be a carrier of coronavirus. The Maharashtra government, after a point, they actually went ahead and stopped the circulation of newspaper precisely for this reason. We have had to shut down the paper, printing of the paper in Ahmedabad as well for some time. And then we are back in all centers now. We are printing, but we are printing in very small numbers. And the advertisement on which a substantial part of our revenue depends. So that is almost next to zero. So it's very difficult and very uncertain as to how it will go from here. We've already announced salary cuts quite early, in fact, in the first week of April itself. So that probably gives you an idea of how fragile the revenue streams are, and how weak is our ability to absorb shocks of shocks because of this kind of disruptions. And it's still very uncertain. We really don't know what's going to happen in the next few months, whether things would normalize or things will go even worse from here. so that part is totally uncertain. The other part about the difficulties in reporting at the time of COVID, and that of course has a different set of challenges, wherein there are severe constraints in our going out and reporting, meeting people, and for very good reasons probably. Now, while we have not been able to report as much as we would have liked to from the field, and there are like so many stories which probably have not been captured, mainly because we have not been able to go out. The fact is that we are doing as much as we can in these times, and as I've said earlier as well, in the sense that in my Pune team, at least, I am the only one who is sitting in my house and working from home. My team is, they go out in the field on a daily basis, not as much as they used to earlier. We have been traveling as well to other places. But of course, there are two things have happened. Of course, one is that while we have cut down on salaries, we have not had a cut on our news gathering expenses. So that hasn't happened. But then as your revenue streams become narrower and narrower, that puts a lot of strain on your news gathering budgets as well. As of now, we have not cut back on our news gathering expenses. So that is the situation. It's very difficult, very uncertain. We are trying to get as much as possible, but of course, we are not getting most of the stories. There are lots of things that are happening probably outside of the major centers in which most of the reporters are, and probably we need to capture many more stories that are unfolding in these times. Thank you.
Thanks, Amitabh. That's you've taken the whole thing. I mean, one of the things I hope we can come up in the discussion after Sandeep Dixit from the Tribune he's on now is, are we looking really truly at a newspaper-less world or a newspaper-free world to some extent? In the future, how would you be able to manage the revenue stream? Mr. Fault may have a thought or two, which I'd like him to share either here or perhaps at the end during the wrap up on this particular thing, because crowdfunding and borrowing from banks without collateral is going to be really, really tough for large or small media chains. Sandeep Dixit of the Tribune, please comment on this specific issue. Sandeep, you'll have to unmute yourself if you're speaking.
Okay.
We can't hear you, Sandeep. Are you speaking into the
can you hear me now?
Yes, please speak. Yeah, please we'll go ahead. And we'd like to welcome Rajdeep Sardesai, who's just joined us. Thank you, Rajdeep.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sandeep Dixit. I'm with the Tribune newspaper. It's a regional paper sold mostly in the north. And as Mehfooz Saab has said, the biggest worrying trend today is the jailing of journalists who tend to criticize the administration. And as is the case in Bangladesh, a whole lot of journalists have been arrested, have been charged, have been jailed briefly for criticizing the administration. Perhaps where the administration could have sent a clarification or something, instead of that, a case is filed against the journalist, he's taken to the prison, and then the magistrate frees him, saying that the charges don't hold. So, and so I would like to bring in the US Commission for International and Religious Freedom. One reason, can you hear me, please? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
One reason why the Indian government reacts so much to the US Commission on International Regional Freedom, Religious Freedom, is because from October they have started speaking about sanctioning officials who had framed the CAA statements, and just now recently they have again spoken about sanctioning officials. And Pakistan, if you see, there was this killer officer in Sindh province, Rana something. He got sanctioned by the US, and all his dreams were shattered of living there in his old age, of settling his kids down there. So I think there should be some kind of an institutional memory where we can record the people, these small tin pot petty dictators who are strutting around, whether that's in Lakshadweep or Chhattisgarh, and who are doing this. I mean, yeah, I can contest the case 2 years. I'll be running around in courts and get acquitted. But what about these chaps who have taken it upon themselves to really prosecute journalists? And the second part is about the health of journalists. I go around the city and I find mostly young reporters, 25 to 35 age group, who are standing with just a mask and perhaps a prayer in the heart. And this should have been a government initiative, a central government initiative, perhaps by the Press Information Bureau, by all the state governments, to get the journalists checked. Because just like chemists, bus drivers, cops, and attendants at hospitals, journalists are the highest risk category. And this is their job is an essential job, which has been acknowledged by the government right from day one. So these are the two main points I would like to put forward. The third about health of the organization, I don't really know much because I'm not the management. But the era of print journalism was really drawing to a close slowly. I live in a housing society on the 6th floor. 3 years ago, when I used to walk down the staircase, I used to find a newspaper wedged in every door. About 2 years ago, it was 1 in 3 doors. And now, of course, in COVID, there's none. So that era was hobbling to a close. It was going to a different direction, perhaps just quality papers, or perhaps trash papers that depend a lot on corporate advertisements. They would survive. I don't know. But this is a different era that we are going to progress into. And we can, Abhi, discuss it more. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Thanks for those very sharp, clear points. And I pick up also on what Mahfouz said, and I'd like a little discussion between the four of us before we open it up to questions. I know we are running a bit behind time, but people joined late, and so we have a little more time, flexible time, and I'm sorry that we are eating into the time of the next panel, but we will wrap it up soon. But I think there are very important points which have been raised, not just about the circulation of papers and the survival of institutions, which I hope Mr. Fort will come in on either now or later. But could the three of you reflect a bit on the journalists who are being arrested? I mean, the health of the media is not just those who are there with gloves on their hand, the mask on their face, and a prayer in their hearts. They're, people shouldn't be sent to jail. Nobody should be sent to jail at the time of the pandemic. I mean, this is crazy. Forget about journalists. Nobody should go to jail. And no magistrate in his right mind should be sending anybody to jail. And the police, who are on the front line themselves, an essential service, should recognize that this is another, as Sandeep said, another essential service. So I'd like the three of you, maybe Mahfouz, Amitabh, and Sandeep, if you could quickly respond to that, and then we would need to go to Q&A briefly, and then the next session.
The clear trend is more oppression. I mean, yes, they should not jail journalists in the time of COVID. These are all theoretically correct, but the mindset is that we have to control misinformation. And according to them, the source of misinformation are the journalists, not those who are doing fake news on the Facebook, not those, various type of people who are totally spreading rumor. I haven't had a single instance in here in Dhaka where somebody who was spreading a blatant lie has been arrested. Everybody who gets arrested happens to be a journalist.
Yeah, and you're facing something like 75 or 80 cases on 84 cases of libel and sedition. I mean, somebody should end criminal defamation in this country and in South Asia, one of the legacy of the British. Yeah, Amitabh, you want to come in quickly, and then Sandeep,
Yeah,
and then we'll move
just
to
one
Raj.
quick point. I'm not surprised that governments anywhere in the world do not like any uncomfortable news. I mean, that's probably a given. I would just want to turn the mirror on ourselves a little bit. A lot of us in our fraternity have been very, very irresponsible with the way they disseminate news, especially on social media, and also in their publications or television or whatever, and that sometimes gives government very simple excuses to then crack down on us. I think there is a lot that we ourselves have to answer for, whether the kind of standards that we set, and also the fact that do we sort of censure that kind of activity within our fraternity. I think it's very important to sometimes look within as well. There are a lot of bad apples in this fraternity. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with you, but we will go to Sandeep now, and then probably you do. Aditya, do we have time for at least one or two questions from participants? Do you have questions?
We have a few, but I think we can adjust them later and move on to the second panel.
That's fine. Let's go to Sandeep.
Yeah, Sandeep? I agree with Amitabh that we have quite a few bad apples, and but the problem is prosecution, even-handed prosecution. What happened in Europe in the 50s and the 60s, there was even-handed prosecution against hate crimes. You will all remember that several high-profile society figures, they went to jail in Europe. So here, I can bring you 30 cases where mainstream news channels have been contradicted by the district police. They're doing a great job, by the way, in contradicting fake news. District police Twitter handles. And nothing has happened to them. So the tendency is to pick on the weak and the vulnerable to send the message across. Just like the Punjab police, they thrash people and they themselves upload the video so that the message goes across. And those people are not middle class, they're not upper class, they are people who cannot complain, who don't have much of a voice. And this is what is happening to a lot of journalists in India also. They're not picking up from mainstream, but they're sending a message across by prosecuting maybe freelance or independent journalists.
Thank you for those points, and I think this has been a terrific panel. I wish there was more time. I always wish we are always running against the clock, against deadlines for the media and on these issues. We've covered, I think, only the surface of the issues, but I want to pick up on a thought that Sandeep expressed, which is on the weak and vulnerable, that the weak pick up the weak and vulnerable, whether it's a state like Manipur or somebody in Chhattisgarh or somewhere else, and go with them. And in the past month, one of the most, to me, powerful, wrenching, moving, painful images, I think for all of us, has been the images of people walking home, carrying hope, bundles of their meager possessions and their children and a little drinking water and whatever food they have as they take those long journeys home, hoping to get home. Now, many of them are in migrant camps. We don't know what the conditions are. And for this, this is really the heart of the next panel, is how did the media cover the most vulnerable communities in this country? Because not many of us know it. I mean, I came to know it myself just a few years ago when I was at an international conference in Delhi, and the World Bank said that 350 million people in India migrate every year. There are 1/4 sorry, 1/4 of the population of this country are migrants. And I'm not talking about external migrants, these are internal migrants. That's huge. And they are the people who build this country. They're the people who build the houses we live in, provide the food we eat, the water we drink, serve us wherever we go, drive the cars. So this is where I want Rajdeep Sardesai, whose group editor India Today, everybody is familiar with Rajdeep. He is one of the finest broadcasters and frankest broadcasters we have. It's a great honor to have him on the show. He'll go first, followed by Kanak Dixit, another great editor and journalist from South Asia of Himal, who started Himal many years ago, an old friend. And then Patricia Mukim, who battles on the front line from the Northeast, from Shillong. So Rajdeep, please, you're on.
Thank you very much.
It's good to moderate you rather than you moderating
I'm very happy
else.
being on the other side. It's easier this way. No, but first of all, thank you very much, Sanjoy, for doing this. I think it's important to have these conversations because I think we don't converse often with each other or listen to each other, living in our own little cocoons in a way. You raised the important question of migrants. We can, dispute the numbers at times. Government tends to often question numbers, but I think what is very clear is that the corona virus fallout has forced almost the urban middle class to be confronted with the images of urban poverty and those who live on the margins. I think we almost erased it from our memory post-liberalization. The entire buzz was about neo-middle class, about aspirational society, all of which may be true in their own way. No one doubts that you have an emerging middle class post-liberalization, but you also have a large number of urban poor. I mean, it is estimated that there are about 63 million micro and small enterprises, which in a sense provide employment to about 11 to 12 crore people. A majority of them, one senses, are from this vulnerable group of migrant workers. And they were the ones who were first hit in a way by these new social distancing norms that were put in. I don't like the word, in fact, social distancing, Sanjay, and I think the media should relook at that. I think the word should be used as physical distancing because social distancing carries a lot of the baggage of the past, especially with links to caste and untouchability. But be that as it may, my sense is, those who lived in, let's say, a 6 by 8 foot room, 5 to a room, Odia migrants who are working in diamond cutting industry in Surat, or someone from Rajasthan who has traveled to Gujarat to work there in a small industry, or someone working in the fields in Punjab. All of them live lives actually very much on the margins. And I think the media, in a sense, did to its credit or capture some of the trauma, particularly when people started hitting the street. I think it almost forced governments to try and ensure transport, as we saw between the Delhi and UP government buses being organized. And yet I sense that there is still a certain callousness. It was treated as an event, not as a process. I don't think post-corona we will revert and go back to those urban poor and ask them about their lives and how they're dealing with the prospect of not having had any employment for the last month and a half. So I think that is what troubles me. Almost erasing from public consciousness and memory of those who live at the bottom of the pyramid. Corona has forced us to tell their stories, but I hope we tell them more often. I think that is, we shouldn't treat the problem of migration as an event. It's a process. You rightly mentioned, 1/4 of this country probably is migrant labor over the last 20, 25 years. As you move away from rural, as farming becomes more unviable, you move to the city. Are we providing them safe housing? Has there been any effort to ensure low-cost housing in our big metros, sanitation, water? I mean, many of them, when I was covering the election last year, one of the issues I took up was water and the kind of water, unhygienic conditions of their toilets and the water that was supplied to those living in slums across the country, who are treated simply as vote banks. And actually, and this is my final point, my worry is that the urban poor, Sanjoy, are not even actually a vote bank for anyone, barring at, in municipal elections when you want to regularize a slum. They are, the farmer is a vote bank that you sort of provide definite sops to. But the urban poor have lost out over the years. And I think Corona has forced us to face the reality that these are the people who keep, as you rightly said, the economic engine churning in urban India. I think the media did a reasonable job. I don't, in covering the issue. But, we came out of it all too quickly and suddenly moved to tabligis and demonizing a community. So we're very quick to move out of the issue, perhaps believing that, who will want to watch these images again and again. And I just hope it becomes a 365-day story telling these stories of the urban poor.
Well, thank you for that, Rajdeep, and all very powerful, poignant points. I think that we count on you and your colleagues and those who are professionals and broadcasters like you, who are people of professional integrity and redoubtable experience to tell these stories 365 days a year and make sure that this story cannot fall off the map. This is a historic time we are living in. It's a time when we need to document every story as much as possible in every language. And that is what I would urge through this panel. On World Press Freedom Day, let us document, each of us, our institutions, our organizations, the language media, as best as we can. Let's put it together in a great, powerful, flowing visual and print narrative. I want to go to, Rajdeep has touched on many points, especially the falling off the map, the rural, not the rural poor, but the urban poor. And I want Kanak Dixit, who from the Himalayas takes this amazing view of South Asia and the world, and an old friend, but also a great editor whom it's been my honor to know for many years. So Kanak, please.
I'm sorry that I seem to be having electricity outages here. So if you stop hearing me, I suggest you just continue to move ahead with the program. Can you hear?
We can hear. What a lovely backdrop.
I'm doing one up on you.
Well,
it's a lovely backdrop.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We are all going to migrate there, but anyway.
My apologies for if I suddenly go offline, because I seem to be having some electricity outages here. So as I said, please continue if I somehow am seen but not heard. Right at the beginning of the program, there was a reference to a journalist from Colombia and as exemplifying the issues faced by journalists all over. Since we're in South Asia, might I at least also in relation to our region, and given that there is nobody from Pakistan represented today, Shakilur Rahman, the publisher and of the Jung Group, who has been treated very vilely by the Pakistani state, I refer to him with reference to all the problems that South Asian journalists are facing, publishers are facing by virtue of doing their job in journalism. That's just by way of locating ourselves within South Asia. Now to come to the topic of migration and media, I feel that what the coronavirus, the COVID-19 has done is highlighted a massive issue that activists have been working for a long time to bring to the attention of the media audiences all over South Asia. And to that extent, COVID-19 has been a boon in letting us focus on what is the volume of migration, what are the numbers, where do they migrate to, and what is the volume of their pain. I believe that for this reason alone, we may just want to thank the virus that came out of Wuhan. Now, as far as the individual topics are concerned, I feel we have done a relatively good job within South Asia of covering migration issues within the country. So there are migration issues in country, apparently more than 350 million in India alone, uh, at least 2 million within Nepal, and likewise 10, 12, 15 million within or more than Pakistan. So I feel this is an opportunity to begin to build empathy for migrants within each of our countries of South Asia, number one. Number two, to build empathy for migrants, not the middle class who plan to migrate away for good, but the migrants, particularly in the Gulf and in Malaysia and other such countries, which take the underclass from South Asia to do their menial labor. Then there is one aspect of international migration that does not really get covered, which is Nepali migrants in India and Indian migrants in Nepal. Because of the closed border elsewhere, there is not much legal migration within, although there are a lot of Bangladeshis within India, of course. But I just want to highlight the fact that there are possibly 2 million Nepali migrant labor in India. And when we read of all the issues regarding migrant labor having to move homeward with only 4 hours notice, something done by an extremely cruel state. Um, there are Nepalis also mixed up in that exodus, number one. The other is Indian citizens as migrants in Nepal. It turns out that Nepal is the 7th largest remittance country for India. And the poorest of regions of India are being supported by labor remittance from Nepal. Uttaranchal, Purvanchal, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha. So there is also an issue regarding movement of labor within Nepal, which has to do with in-country migrants as well as Indian migrants in Nepal. So the reason I am raising these issues is to highlight the fact that we are suddenly brought head on with the topic of migration, which essentially supports our economies. And if we can learn from this experience for the longer term in terms of how important migrants are, which is why it is important to look after their security, to be empathetic about their needs, about their need of their wanting to go back home. For example, migrants are lined up till the day before yesterday in the western border of Nepal and the southern border of Nepal, wanting to come into Nepal. Likewise, many hundreds of Indian citizens want the border, but the borders were essentially sealed. So this is my final point is regarding media coverage. I believe that media has a fairly good bit of coverage to highlight the plight of hundreds of thousands of migrants in South Asia. And I think there is something we can learn from our mistakes were made, particularly in areas other than covering migrants. For example, just to give you a quick point, the whole issue about Tablighi Jamaat in India almost also had a mirror reflected coverage in Nepal. But we were more or less able to nip that in the bud. But this goes away from migrants. So for now, let me pull back and just say that I believe on the whole, the media has done an exemplary job in covering the plight of migrants.
Thank you for that. You've covered that very important perspective, which we don't often think about. We see it, but don't. Of Nepali migrants in India and Indian migrants in Nepal. 2 million Nepali migrants in India, nearly a tenth of the population of your country, and that it's the 7th largest remittance sender to India. To places including the Northeast. In fact, we will now travel to the Northeast to hear from Patricia Mukhim. And I hope, Patricia, in your remarks on migrants and so on, you may also like to refer to some of the problems that people from the Northeast have faced in other parts of the country, because what Kanak spoke about of borders being sealed, we can unseal borders, but we have to unseal minds. And, that's a long-term battle we've all been fighting on perception and images for a very long time. Patricia?
Yeah, thank you everyone, and wish all of you a very meaningful Press Freedom Day. Now, the point is, I find it very hard to believe that in this country, the policymakers completely forgot about these migrant laborers. The lockdown was announced so suddenly. It could have been announced a little later, giving people time to travel and maybe even expressing their options, whether they want to go back, they want to stay where they are, or whatever options they have in mind. We didn't do that. The lockdown came so suddenly. There was just 3 hours, and after that, when the migrant labor became so kind of disruptive, then we were told that the media has created, it was fake news that created this crisis. So I don't really understand how we are actually grappling with this whole crisis of migrant labor. And we haven't spoken about migrant labor from Bangladesh in India. We are always looking at Bangladesh as a very poor neighbor. In the Northeast alone, if you're looking at road construction, even building construction, a lot of that work is done by, and also coal mining, by the way, a lot of that work is done by migrant labor from Nepal and Bangladesh. We haven't even taken account of how many there are here now, whether they want to go back, because now with the states shutting their borders, it's going to be very difficult to manage even those who really want to come back. Then whether we have enough isolation centers in the respective states. In Assam alone, there are a few lakh people coming. Assam has been on top of things in many ways. They've been able to create the isolation centers. In Meghalaya, we have at least about 13,000 of them. I don't know if that's the correct count. In Tripura, in all the other states, there are migrant laborers that have left and want to come back. Now that the sector is opening up a little, yesterday I heard the Assam Chief Minister saying we now have to ask people whether they want to stay back there because some of the manufacturing sector has opened up, or they want to come back. So we need a lot of data actually, which doesn't seem to be available at the moment. Yes, I think the media has covered very honorably the problems of migrant labor. Especially, I think we should thank Barkha Dutt for bringing this very close up and personal to most of us. And we were perhaps, I also must admit that this COVID seems to have taken all of us in the media by storm. We didn't know what to report, what not to report. There was so much of data that was not being given to us. Many times we were second guessing a lot of stuff. And then we were actually told by a section of the bureaucracy that, look, we are in a crisis situation. Please don't be too critical of what government is doing. I don't know whether that was an appeal or, attempt to tell us how to do our work, but it's kind of created a very oppressive atmosphere. We really don't know what to give out, what not to give out. We were trying to do a kind of a contact tracing of a certain person who came from abroad and who apparently must have brought the first COVID case to Meghalaya. But, we were told that you need to go a little slow on that. I don't know why. I can't understand. Everybody else has to know and take preventive measures. So at this point in time, I'm not sure what to report, what not to report. Of course, we are on the front line. We are not reporting from home. We are going out. Our reporters are given just the bare necessities of a mask and some gloves. I don't know how protective that is, They're going out everywhere. They went out into the rural areas. We're reporting from everywhere. So I'd like to keep on this on record that we are doing our best. We are not kind of gripped by anything. But at this time, I'd just like to ask ourselves that there is a section of the media that is constantly labeling other media as being liberal, being this, being inciting violence on different categories of people. What are we to do of that kind of media? We seem to be caught in a deadlock. We don't know what to do, what not to do. I mean, how long can that kind of media continue to guide our lives? And that kind of media only looks at TRPs. And at the moment in this country, there seem to be a lot of people subscribing to that kind of very, the hate ideology that is being spread. So this, to me, is a matter of great concern that we also need to discuss on this day when we are discussing press freedom.
Thanks, Patricia. I was hoping you would. The last portion is going to be addressed by the third panel, but I'm sure all of us can weigh into the third panel once the three panelists have shared. And Veena Sarwar, who is in the US, and it's, as I said, 3 o'clock her time now. I don't know 3 a.m. whether she was to send a video recording, but I don't know if we got it. But I want to pick up on a couple of things that you said. But one thing you did not speak about was the issue of racial discrimination, which people of not just Northeastern origin, but people who look different, like people from China, of Chinese origin, Southeast Asian, are facing across the world, in the US, in the UK, in Europe, in India, in Indonesia, and other countries. So that is also a real issue. Somebody has got their phone on. May I ask Aditya, please mute everybody. Thank you. There are a bunch of questions which have come up, and I'd really like Rajdeep, Patricia, and Kanak to respond to them. And I'm going to ask Aditya Sharma to. We have time really to take 2 or 3 questions. And could you please read out the 3 that you've picked?
Sure, great. So the first question is from Arti Adiz, and she asks, is it okay for media to be part of a movement directly? What are the ethical issues related to this? So if this is probably a more broad-based question. So if any 3 of you would like to answer this.
Can I just sort of respond by saying, I think I think the media's primary duty is to stand with the victims and hold those in power accountable. I was the other day interviewing a minister, and I was told by a viewer, you should have been a little less harsh. We are in COVID times. You should show empathy. My response was, you should show empathy to the poor, to the vulnerable, to the migrant. You don't show empathy to the minister. The minister has to answer question. Why did it take 6 weeks for the government to finally decide that they would send migrants back home by train? And that too after 24 hours earlier, before that, saying we'll only provide buses. So suddenly you realize that you can't, the number of migrants are so great that you can't provide buses, you need trains. And then you got the case in Karnataka where you were charging the migrants steep ticket prices to go home. Now, surely these are questions that need to be asked. They need to be asked according to me in a manner that makes the governments accountable. I think what has happened, and Patricia touched on it, because of this, of a culture that has been created where TRPs matter over all else, the migrant story or the story of urban poor will sadly possibly disappear off our TV screens once the COVID-19 issue is over. It will only be raised next time when either migrants are beaten up when they come to Mumbai because some group or the other has a problem with workers coming in from the outside. I mean, my worry is that, as someone is, should journalists effectively, I think the question is, should journalists be seen to be taking sides? My point is, we have to stand with the victims. And clearly the major victims of this, of a lockdown, however necessary it is seen to be, are the migrant labor. And every time they come out on the streets, we can't call them violators. There was almost one sort of narrative to suggest they're violating social distancing norms. I ask all those who say that, could you live 5 or 6 to a room, 6 by 8? It's very easy. Which is why I think it was important to tell the story, to just shake people out of their stupor. Whether it will sustain beyond this and be turned into an event is my concern. I believe we must stand with the victim and not with those in power. We get so influenced by the narrative of those in power, and that overwhelms all else, that we don't tell the stories from below. I think we need to tell domestic helps. We're talking about migrant workers. Let me just add, what about domestic helps? Many of them have not been paid their April salaries because they couldn't, because of the lockdown rules, go to the cooperative societies. Do we tell their stories or not? I think we need to be conscious uh, of not confusing standing with the victim, of saying, should journalists be seen to identify with the movement? We're just identifying with a story which I think needs to be told with great courage and constantly told.
Thank you.
Right.
I don't think we really have time for more questions, but very quickly, Patricia, because I am very conscious of the fact that the next panel is getting quite delayed. But Patricia and Kanak, do you have quick points? Because what otherwise I can do is we can go to the next panel and then we'll have a roundup from all of you on some of these other issues. One thing I would say is, resonates, what Rajdeep says resonates greatly, I think, with all of us, because one of the principles I followed, certainly in my career as a writer and journalist, is truth to power, but also compassion for the weak.
Sanjoy, can I come in now?
Yeah, please, very quickly.
Yeah. So no, this thing about racism, I'm sorry, it just slipped my mind. I have so many things in my mind at the moment. Yeah, I can't understand in this country how we're not able to still accept our own citizens from the northeastern part of the country, and they've suffered a great deal during this COVID crisis. I really hope we take on this issue as well, especially the television media, which has a large, coverage and is watched across by the powerful as well. So I hope this also becomes, along with the migrant labor story, the racism suffered by people from the Northeast in different parts of the country has to be taken up. But I'm also very, saddened by this culture of the curfew, because day before yesterday, a mother applied for a curfew pass to visit her son who was ailing in Hojai and was not given the pass, and her son passed away. So these are very sad stories. This is one we know. There may be many others. We've brought back the license permit Raj, and the fact that it took the MHA to announce the next lockdown 3.0, itself shows us that I'm asking myself, is the bureaucracy actually ruling this country today?
Kanak, do you want to come in now or later?
Briefly, just briefly. I'll just make a point. Can you hear me? I'm
Yes.
unmuted. Okay. All right. Just briefly, there is journalists can be mission journalists as required. Generally, they are journalists, but when it comes to core issues of human rights, democracy, and pluralism, we are fully within our rights to do mission journalism. In the context of migrant labor, let me just mention straight away that there is overall in society in general, particularly in middle class society that runs most of South Asia and the state of South Asia, there is a class bias. And the class bias, I am proud to say that media on the whole has not been carried away by this class bias, as we have seen in the coverage thus far. So we've all seen the hundreds of thousands of migrants walking across the plains of India. Let me say that how fortunate we all are that it was early spring when the migration began. And had it been midsummer, the situation would have been much more dire. But as we look at the migrants walking across the plains of India, which the Indian media presents to all of us, we must also keep in mind there are migrants walking in the hills of Nepal and to the plains of Nepal. There must be migrants in Pakistan walking across vast terrain during the lockdown there. And so I feel here is an opportunity for us all to think as South Asians, a region with nearly a fourth of the world's population, and a region which is actually made up of migrants within country and international and overseas migrants. So I feel on the whole, media has done a good enough job to let the middle classes know that there is a world of migration out there.
Thank you for those very resounding words, Kanak. And we have to go to the next panel. And I hope we can come back to these issues. Those who ask questions, I'm sorry we're out of time, but we will come back to more questions at the end. I just refer very briefly to something that Kanak said before we move to the next panel, is that here's a chance for us to think as South Asian. That's why we have a South Asian panel. It's not just an Indian panel on COVID, because the media everywhere in the world, and particularly in South Asia, where we are, is under stress as an essential service. And its health, its durability, and its ability to cope with the crisis and address issues of human rights, particularly, has been under pressure. And it's done, I think, on the whole, a terrific job. I want to go to Manisha Pandey of News Laundry. News Laundry is our partner for this program, and we're very glad they're on board. And Manisha is very well known for her show and the positions she takes. And her panel is, she is joined by Neerja Chaudhary, veteran columnist, political commentator, earlier with the Indian Express and the Statesman, now independent, and then Kumar Lopez from Colombo, who is the executive director of the Sri Lanka Press Institute. We hope that Bina Sarwar will be sending a video message, but I'm not sure. Aditya will tell me if it's come through.
We have a message from her, and we'll play it sometime in this panel.
Okay, right. Manisha, you want to come on first? Thank you.
Yes, hello, hi. I hope you guys can hear me. I wish you all a really happy World Press Freedom Day. And especially, I just want to give a special message to all the reporters who've been covering the pandemic from villages, cities, and towns. A big thank you to all of you, and a very happy World Press Freedom Day. Just to start, kick this panel off, I just wanted to flag two sorts of broad trends that we saw in the media when it came to misinformation. One was that and I'm speaking, I mean, this is not true for all of media, but a major section of the media, especially a major section of the television media. I think there were two sorts of misinformations we saw. One was that we saw misinformation related to corona. So, for example, that coronavirus it's a bioweapon that was developed in a lab, and it's a big freak conspiracy against the world, a Chinese conspiracy, stuff like that. Or you saw cures being aired on television, whether it is to drink lemon juice or to do certain things to boost your immunity, when we know that immunity is not something that you can boost in a matter of 3 to 4 days. It's basically something that takes a long time. And other stuff like, curiously, you also saw gurus or religious figures or spiritual heads take up a lot of airtime talking about coronavirus and how to deal with it. Now, I understand that in times of pandemic, people generally tend to turn to faith for comfort, but it's not the job of news professionals, especially in times that are, especially in times that could pose, a danger to life, to comfort people. I think it's more important for people to be warned, for people to be told exactly the gravity of the problem, the numbers, and why you need to be careful and what you need to do, what is mandated scientifically for you to do. So I thought that was one aspect. The other aspect was the communalization of the pandemic. And we really saw this from the time that the Tablighi Jamaat hit news. I think it was sometime around the end of March, where news broke that, this was turning out to be a hotspot, and the congregation had led to a lot of positives, and it had actually had, pan-India effect. Now, it's true that the Tablighi Jamaat had been irresponsible in its gathering, but I think the excessive focus that we had on the Jamaat for the 2 weeks, and only a focus on how terrible it was, with hashtags like Corona Jihad, Corona Bomb, sort of dog whistling this and making this into a Muslim issue rather than an issue of a sect, which is what really a Tablighi Jamaat is. It doesn't really represent all of Muslims in India. So when you saw, day in and day out kind of demonizing of the Jamaat, you had certain news reports that falsely reported on attacks by the Tabligh ki Jamaat on health workers. There were instances where newspapers and television channels said that the Jamaat was, attacking health workers or it attacked the police. And the police would come and, address the channel or the newspaper that had spread this news, saying that, no, this does not happen. Please, we are issuing a correction. This sort of an incident never happened. So you had, fake news of that genre, though there were some allegations that have yet to be proved. But beyond that, there were also allegations which the police then, I think it was a fascinating case of the police checking journalists, or police saying that, police handles saying, telling journalists that you've got this wrong. Usually it's the other way around, where journalists question the police, or journalists question on, on whatever facts is presented. So I think with the Tabligh ki Jamaat, what happened was, if you speak to a lot of Indians today, and I can say this anecdotally with my neighbors or my relatives or my friends, there's a perception that India would not have had the issue of coronavirus had it not been for the Tabligh ki Jamaat. And this was actually aired on television channels. Certain section of television channels did say stuff like India would have won the battle against corona had it not been for the Jamaat, or that the Jamaat has thrown India into this pandemic, which is, demonstrably not true. There's really no proof or no data for us to back up the fact that the pandemic in India, the sole reason for the pandemic to, come to India was because of the Jamaat. So I think one of the unfortunate aspects of reporting on the coronavirus was how it took a communal turn. And you saw that then in the sort of fallback it had, where you've had discrimination against Muslim vendors, you've had you've had reports which have said that Muslims have not been able to, sell their vegetables or fruit, because there were also misinformation, videos floating around of showing Muslims as spreading the virus through food or whatever. And this was really ably countered by websites like Alt News. I'd like to make a special mention of Alt News that really looked at all these videos that were floating around on WhatsApp, sometimes found their way to mainstream media, and fact checking them to tell us that, no, this is not true. So I think briefly, these are the two sort of misinformations that we saw. And I think the second aspect of communalizing a pandemic like this, like Patricia had said, this would have far-reaching impact beyond the pandemic, because once there's a perception that these guys are the reason that caused this deadly disease, it's going to have a far-reaching impact way beyond, way beyond even the timeline of the till when we have to suffer the coronavirus, because this then causes a perception against a community, which I think is very dangerous. That's about it.
Thanks, Manisha, for that, because you've raised a whole range of issues, which I hope our panelists and other colleagues will respond and react to. The whole issue of communalizing the pandemic, as well as the fact checking by police. I mean, who've been at the we've been receiving a lot of flack from media on the way they've behaved, especially in the initial days and weeks, and perhaps still do. So that's really interesting to hear. I'd like to go to our next panel, and I think either Kumar can come in now, or would Nirja like to come? I think Nirja, why don't you go next, and then we'll have Kumar, and possibly we have a video from Beena, and we may play that video towards the end. Thank you, Kumar. Sorry, Nirja.
Thank you, Sanjoy. I know you're running short of time. I'm going to make very quick 4 or 5 points. One that, for all the fake news, misinformation, disinformation, communal divide that's got reflected in the media during this period, I want to say how proud I feel of the Indian media today. The way they've gone to the ground, the way they've captured the information. Migrant story is only one part of it. They have risked their lives. Reporters have been out in the field. In Bombay, this was 10 days ago, 57, 58 of the journalists were tested positive. And yet this process is continuing. So I want to register my salutations and pride and to belong to the Indian media today. Point number 2 I want to make is that our world is going to change. We all know that. Life is going to change. Governance is going to change. And Rajdeep, I hope in times to come, it will not be business as was, but the great themes of equity, environment, food security, public health, they are going to be the mega themes that will dominate. And if that happens, the media will have to play a stellar role and do much more questioning than we have also done in the past. So I think the role of the media, and I want to go to just one line on what Mahfouz said on finding the new business models and the danger there also. If there is going to be an economic downturn, which there will be, and we are heading for recession, some say even a period of depression, then ads for the media are going to dry up, and papers may need to depend much more on government advertisement. Where does this leave the media? Will the government want the media to kowtow more? Therefore, what we need to do is out of the box thinking of the new models, and we can't do this as individual media groups or individual editors. We have to do this globally. How do we generate the financing that is going to be needed for media to be truly free and independent? So I would say a global initiative, and Sanjay, your organization can really take the lead in this, get the Commonwealth countries together on this to begin with. Number 3, I want to say, you know, the difficulties that journalists are now facing, many of them are laid off, losing jobs, cut in salaries, you know, also health issues. Should we think of starting a fund as media persons to help journalists, our fellow journalists who may be facing trouble? That's just an idea. What about, you know, the whole thing on the communal thing and the fake media? I agree, you know, to arrest people and FIR for something that you, suppose you were not able to check a fact, suppose you were not able to get the other side of the story. We are functioning in very difficult times. And I think we have to engage with governments and authority that and raise our voice again that this should not be done at all. And of course, from our side, we've got to be much more careful about checking on facts. And it is, you know, the print media today, ironically, many people are turning to it for credible, accurate information, whereas it is facing an existentialist crisis, as we know. So given all that, I think the last point I want to make is on this whole communalization. Hopefully it's just, I think it has been toned down in the last days, but to have the media, a section of the media play that kind of a role. You already have an economic emergency, you already have a health emergency, people are facing life and death questions, and to then have something that can blow up into a communal conflict, law and order problem, this is not a route we should go down on at all. And I think of that in recent days for a variety of reasons. Maybe some international pressure, some domestic wisdom has dawned on the powers that be. And ultimately, I think a questioning media, media that brings to light what is going around at the ground level, is actually in the interest of the governments, because then they can get around to addressing those issues. And if they address those issues, they will get political benefit out of it. If they don't address those issues, if they don't know what is happening, suppose they didn't know what was happening with the migrants and the media had not brought that to light, I think what is followed in the subsequent days, though late, might not have happened. So I think media is a friend of government. It should not be seen as an adversary, particularly at a time like this. And we have to continue even more than ever before to be more and more questioning about what is going wrong and not become less questioning of what is going wrong.
Thank you, Nija, for those very passionately argued thoughts. I mean, those of us of a particular age and vintage grew up with Nija Chaudhary's This India column, which we read for many years. So, if you guys haven't, none of you, and some of you haven't read it, I urge you to go to This India and read how she traveled the country and told the stories of people, bringing them to life. And I hear everything that's being said, and I don't know if the media can be a friend of government. I don't really agree there. I think it can be a challenger, and it can hold governments to account. We can be friends with people in government. We can be our sources, but I don't think we can be a friend of government per se.
I think Sanjay, Sanjay, if I may say here, I think the government needs to see media not as a disruptor, which is the way the governments have a tendency to see the media. In today's circumstances, the media is playing a role which actually helps the government to play its role. That's the point I was making.
No, I agree. The media is providing a service. Whether the government likes the service or not is not
That's
something
right.
that we can help. But the government may not see us as a friend. We may, and some of us may see the government as a friend. That's a different thing. I want to come to Kumar Lopez, who from Colombo, the director of the Sri Lanka Press Institute, who has a slightly different take on this. We've discussed this a couple of times in the past, and it's a very interesting thought. And Kumar, can you come in? And then after that, we'll have a short video from Beena Sarwar, who's kindly recorded a video for us. If there is time, we'll play that. Kumar, do you want to come in?
Oh, thank you. You can hear me, Sanjay? Yes. Thank you, Sanjay, and a happy World Press Freedom Day to everybody. I echo the concerns and the issues that we're all tackling. I believe it's almost the same all over, except that we don't have migration issues because we are an island. So either you swim or you do take a flight. So it becomes a little bit difficult. But I thought, like, while we were actually talking about all the challenges that we have and all the concerns that we have, the good point of thing is that in Sri Lanka, when a recent survey was done, we had about this survey was done by another organization, which I mentioned, called PepperQ Market Research. I mean, they had about 2,300 responded online, and they actually had come up with this summary of the information source and its credibility. And I believe this can be reflecting in all the other countries as well, because sometimes we tend to feel like, I mean, the challenge is there with misinformation and disinformation. And you find here that, I mean, the TV, while TV is still the top in regard to usage of information source and information source, and then 60% for social media, radio 32%, newspaper 29%. Now, all these figures are for Sri Lanka. Pardon my spelling error on the information at the top, that I quickly put it through just now. And you would find that the trust level, it's still interesting. I mean, people still tend to trust the mainstream media, right? So that is a good sign for us. I mean, we are struggling, but then, yes, there is a way that we could come out, because the trust level seems to be still high compared to what it could be on social media, on blogs, right? And even on sometimes even in SMSs alerts, right? Which is a good sign. But the challenge now is, like, are we, as the traditional media, the mainstream media, can build on this, right? Build on this. Now, we have been having some discussions, and I find like one of the reasons why we are pushed to this misinformation and disinformation, which is now also crept in to our mainstream media, is the need to break news. Who's breaking the news first, right? The breaking of the news. And then the social media providing a platform for individual building of their brands, right? Can I tweet this first before the newsroom does? So we are looking at policies, and policies have been in there as well, right? One of the interesting that came out recently when we were having discussion just after the COVID, as you were saying, as many of our speakers said, is that the journalists are struggling with their income levels. Newsrooms are retrenching, yes. And some of the suggestions that are coming from the journalists is that, look, I mean, can we go to the government? Can we ask them to provide us some reliefs so that because we become an integral part, we become important and we are accountable to the public. But the question would be, does the public think that we have done our job properly, right? Yes, these figures, yes, in regard to the trust, yes. But could we have kept it at a different level in regard to the trust levels? Can we as journalists go forward and say, look, guys, I am a journalist. I have done my part. The mainstream has done my part. Can we go out and say, look, can you give us some crowdfunding? Can we go for crowdsourcing in regard to building our operating models? That's a question I believe like every journalist would have to ask today and every media newsroom have to ask. I'm 100% sure that some of the media houses have kept to their promises, being ethical, being responsible to the public and written and delivered and communicated on public interest. But the challenge now is we have the majority, right? Where the challenge is, can we go forward and say, gentlemen, people, we are journalists. We need to be there for you to continue with the news that you need to hear, information that you need to hear, and we will ensure that we are accountable. That's the question I believe that we would all have to ask today, right? And I'm sure some of us may have, some of us, I think we already see the mainstream media compromising on things, but this is the challenge that I want. So the mis and disinformation challenge today is while being out there on social media, for me, this data says while people consume it, not necessarily they trust all what it comes out, right? So can we improve our credibility? So with that note, I would basically leave my thoughts with you. Sanjay?
Thanks, Kumar. I would just open it up to the panel because I think all three of you have come with, in a way, different thoughts, but there is one underlying theme of the credibility of the institutions, where we've been working for many years. I think one thing that Kumar has raised is, frankly, are we worth the trust? Is the media worth the trust? I mean, because that trust will perhaps drive the support, the financial support that will make survival viable or possible. I just want to bring both of you in, and anybody else from the other panels who wants to pitch in, but first the initial panel, others, and then we'll have a couple of questions.
I mean, if you ask my opinion, Sanjay, is that I think many of the medias can bounce back, right? We can reverse. I mean, like if I take something like, say, most of the newspapers, if you take most of the traditional media, we knew one day there'll be a change over to online media. But the same tilt and the same changeover can also take place when we have a situation where there is loads of misinformation and disinformation, where people will go towards credible news sites, news papers, news organization, which are accountable to the media. So personally, I feel this could be an opportunity for us to change the tilt and look at it in a totally different perspective, because we can build on the credibility, because we are, I mean, probably we are the well-trained than probably the citizen journalist. We know how to look at things in different angles. The ethics that we have built, or sometimes you find like journalists, they know the ethics, but when they write, I don't know where that ethics is, right? They tend to keep it into the cupboard or the desk, the drawer, and then probably write the story. But I think we have enough of people who have stood the challenging times. I mean, I was posed the question to say, like, I mean, do you think in a advertisement-driven media sector where media need to survive and sustain itself, could the media be independent? I personally believe it can, but it is not going to be easy. It can, provided that we are able to show the line. And I'm sure many of the senior editors have shown that line in the past. And even now there are editors who are showing that line, saying that, look, advertisement, but this is going to compromise my line, right? I will be accountable to the public, and this is where we differentiate. Drawing of the line is possible. People have done it, editors have done it, and we have heard from editors who are doing it at the moment now. So I think it's time for us to showcase that again.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that on the issue of trust. I think that globally, it's a global phenomena that media professionals have suffered a trust deficit. And I think this is, just to bring an incident to you, our founder, Madhu Trehan, talks about the time from back in the 70s and 80s where she talks of a time where journalists were welcomed, when a reporter hit a scene of riot or accident or was covering, even conflict zones, journalists were welcomed because people felt that, okay, here, these guys have come and they're going to broadcast our truth to the world. So, there was a sort of welcoming aspect to it. And cut to 2020 where, we know that reporters in News Laundry and other organizations have faced hostile situations. People have felt that journalists have come to twist facts, or journalists will come and, air misinformation about their reality, or they look at them as with a certain amount of suspicion. So I do think that maybe this is also a reason, there are lots of reasons to this. I'm guessing maybe an overall deterioration in what we sometimes see in big media or popular media, or even because of social media or WhatsApp and stuff like that. But I do think in times of COVID, it's a good time to see how people have sort of reposed their trust to newspapers and television channels that give you news, pure news. I do think that especially when people feel there's fear or panic and that people feel like they're confronting something that they haven't confronted before, they do look to media professionals to give them the truth, to give them basic information, basic news of what's happening in their area. Okay, how many, for example, just the lockdown, people do turn to news to know that, okay, is my area in green zone or orange zone, or is what sort of shops will open, or what sort of things will I be allowed to do? So, or how many cases? So people are turning to news. And I think when we're on social media, Twitter or Facebook, we tend to view world in very hyper polarized ways. We tend to think that everyone here is either left or right or center or pro-government or anti-government, but we forget that an average news consumer, despite who they vote for or despite what their political leanings may be, still do look to news to get news. It's as simple as that. So I may consider myself right-wing, and I may not like this channel because I think, oh, they're not right-wing enough, but I will still look to them to give me basic news about my neighborhood, my city, my town, about government, government announcements and stuff like that. And I think that's a good thing to know. People are still turning to news professionals for information. And we can build on that, we can regain some of the lost trust, building on that confidence that people still, have in news professionals.
Right. Thanks, Manisha, for that. I'd like to go to Nija because we are not running out of time. We actually can expand this, but I'm conscious of everybody else's time. Because Manisha, you raised a very good point, and I hope that when we are doing the wrap up, maybe Rajdeep can come into this of the issue in Kanak, because he has also faced physical problem, and others like Patricia on the question of journalist safety and professionalism. As they are professionals, they get targeted. Despite the fact that they're going into a very risky situation. So is there a risk management process that we need to be more cognizant of? I know that the BBC, CNN and others do this risk training in conflict areas, but we do go into non-conflict areas, but areas where there is violence, like the riots and so on, as recently in Delhi and elsewhere. But Nija, do you want to come in? And then we'll have Bina's video, which is 6 minutes, but I don't know if we have time to play the whole thing. Yeah, Nija?
Question, I would say, yes, we are regaining that some of the trust that was lost because large sections of the mainline media, and I'm talking of India, have featured or written about, or put across reality as it exists in a dispassionate, matter-of-fact, factual manner. And you use absolutely the right word in a professional. That is the right word in a professional manner. And that is the reason I know a large number of people who were, who had questions about whether the media puts out what is true or not. are today turning to that very media for accurate, credible information. So I think we are regaining some of the trust that was lost.
Thanks, Nija, for that. I have a slight dilemma now. Either we open it up to all of you, or we play Bina's video. I just want to take a vote on the panel. Can we play Bina's video now? It's 6 minutes long. I don't know if we can watch all of it, but I think it'll be important to hear her voice. And then we could maybe hear the audience and then do a wrap up from everybody, including Mr. Pault, if he's still there from UNESCO in Paris. Is that okay? Can you play Bina's video? Yeah. I assume that means a yes. So okay. Aditya, can you play Bina's video?
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not there with you live just now. Trying to be brief, I share a few thoughts about this panel's topic on misinformation, disinformation, and fake news, which is so relevant in today's digital world of social media. I think one of the biggest issues in this probably is what the global phenomenon that we can call patriotic trolling, which is relatively new in terms of how it's used, a weapon in terms of how it's used against journalists. And the related term I would submit is what I would say is patriarchal trolling, which is which is used to target particularly women and women journalists in particular. And then there's two terms that I learned from Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, which are astroturfing and pounding. So astroturfing is, of course, astroturf is the fake grass, which then makes it all look real. And then pounding is, the first thing is to pound the victim. And then in that astroturf, the fertilizer is social media. And she also calls it, there's a scorched earth policy. You silence the opponents and you leave them incapable of action. So her organization, Rappler, reveals that 26 fake accounts can influence 3 million others, and it's a full-time job. And the data collected by Rappler shows how the same messages copy-pasted multiple times, up to 40 to 80 times a day. So we know this, of course, but when you have the data, it makes it a little bit easier to understand how organized it is, how the onslaught is on journalism, particularly on social media. And then, of course, then the more and more something is repeated, it becomes fact. A lie told 1,000,000 times becomes a fact, right? And the bandwagon that's created then is like everybody believes in something. A certain journalist or a certain politician is corrupt, and everybody believes it. So why don't you? So right now we can see this phenomenon in Pakistan with the Jung Group, the Jung Geo Media Group, the owner of which has been behind bars since March 12th. And also under attack is the Dawn Media Group these days. Which means that when this propaganda is repeated again and again in public on social media, you have journalists being attacked as they go out to do their jobs as soon as they identify themselves as being from those media. This phenomenon, there's a scientific background to how this propaganda is being used, this misinformation, disinformation, and fake news is being propagated. And Rappler has used something called natural language processing, which is a branch of artificial intelligence that deals with the interaction between computers and humans. And their findings show that the intensity of online attacks correlate to political timelines, for example, an upcoming election or a campaign. And just 3 social media accounts in a targeted way can influence thousands of others. And the one-sidedness of the fight is evident in how heavily social media activity is weighted towards the establishments that we are all up against in our countries. And another strategy, of course, is to use the criminal courts to attack attack journalists, which is what's been done in the case of Mir Shakilur Rahman of the Jung NGO Media Group. And also how women are used, denigrated as sexual objects. And of course, the end game is to intimidate and to make it difficult for anyone to do their jobs. So I just would like to end by, well, I won't end. I just want to point out that just 2 days ago, a Baloch journalist was found dead in Sweden who had been missing for the last 2 months, Sajid Hussain, chief editor of the Balochistan Times. And about Mir Shakilur Rahman, who's incarcerated, and about Sajid Hussain, when I posted about these on my Facebook page, one very dear friend about Mir Shakilur Rahman said, but isn't he very corrupt? And about Sajid Hussain, on another friend's Facebook page, somebody wrote that, well, these Baloch, they're all traitors. And so in a way, it's a false argument that kind of justifies that if you are corrupt or if you are quote unquote a traitor, then anything that is done against you is justified. And this misinformation and disinformation and these hashtags and trends that are done so deliberately actually then create that astroturf that Maria Ressa has talked about. And so the bottom line, of course, now is what do we do? And of course, I mean, like all of you, I would say we would take a stand. We would stand against the bullies, and we would come together and hold the line. And good news is that it's not just fake news and anger and outrage that spread fast. The research also shows that the second biggest thing that people like to share is inspiration and courage and consistency. So I think on this World Press Freedom Day, I would just like to say that I stand with all of you, with my colleagues around the world, to hold the line. Thank you and have a great seminar, and I'm sorry I can't be there.
Well, from all of us, although Bina can't hear us at this time because it's 3 in the morning in Boston where she is, we respect her, the fact that she's put this together, the thoughts on AstroTurf, turf pounding, and social media, and the need to stand in solidarity, because in that lies strength. In division lies, as we all know, lies weakness, and what other elements can take advantage of. I would like the other panelists, if they have thoughts, closing thoughts, to come in now. Rajdeep and Sandeep, Amitabh, Mahfouz, I know had to go to another meeting, and other colleagues who've been Kanak, Patricia, and all others, if they have thoughts, if you could just share them now. I don't think we can come to a conclusion. I would like this to be, if you agree, to be the first of a series that we do with us and with perhaps more in the room. We have something like, it's not a big audience for Rajdeep, but we have 300 plus viewers watching this live on YouTube. It's being not just live streamed, it is recorded, and it will be sent across the world, thanks to Aditya and my IT officer, Ajit Mishra, and their hard work. So I'd like to recognize that. Aditya, do we have time for one question, at least from the audience? I'm very conscious of the fact that we haven't had any questions, really one or two.
Question coming from Ghana, all the way from Ghana. So Emilio asks that, how can the media capitalize on access to information law to give accurate and timely information using human rights based? And I think it's a very timely, it's a very interesting question for this panel. So if anyone of you could answer this.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether Kumar or Amitabh wants to come to that, or anybody else.
Can you just tell me the question again? It wasn't very clear.
Sorry, you want me to repeat this? Wait,
go to the question again. Yeah.
The question was, so this is Emilio from Ghana, all the way from Ghana, and he asks, how can the media capitalize on access to information law to give accurate and timely information using human rights-based approach?
Okay, I guess in our context, it probably refers to the RTI law. I think over the years, it's becoming much more and more difficult to access information through RTI. It's not been easier. It's getting more difficult. And see, also in these kind of times, where you when you need information much more quickly than wait for RTI. RTI is a very good tool when you are in a long haul story, when you are following a story for a long time, and then you want to develop on the inputs. What we are seeing in pandemic is probably a daily sort of a reportage that goes on. And here you have to depend on your old traditional way of reporting, wherein probably you have to go out, you have to make your calls, you have to meet people. Now, of course, there are additional constraints that we have as of now. But I think for the coverage of pandemic as such, as of now, as it is unfolding, I think we'll have to rely more and more on our traditional news gathering.
Thanks. Kumar, do you want to come in?
Yes, I mean, like Amitabh was absolutely spot on with the ability to get RTI working under current context and protection of human rights. But what I would also say is like this could also be the time. I mean, like what we are approaching, how my organization is approaching in Sri Lanka is to remind people that RTI is there, but not to say to use it, but it is a way of having a two-pronged approach. One is basic to tell the people like the government is promising so many things, saying that I dole out 5,000 rupees to you, I'm doling out food to you, etc. and so on. But it's an ideal time to keep people also reminded saying, look, if you have not got it, when the situation opens up, you have the ability to use the right to information. So that will ensure that they could actually see who has got it, why they have not got it. The other approach, the other side of the coin is the government, the public authorities would also see that message and saying that, look, we better be accountable to the public. Otherwise, our people will use RTI. That is provided the RTI is operating and the environment is conducive and it is working and the government still supports RTI. So I feel at this point in time, as Amitabh rightly said, this is not the time for us to be filing RTI to get information. But it is the time to remind people that there is, if RTI is there, if FOIA, if freedom of information access is there, FOIA, that to remind people to say like there is RTI, and for the public authority to remind it saying that you do your job properly because RTI might come to you. So that's how I feel RTI could really help in getting the human right aspect.
Thank you for that, both of you. I think that dual approach is very much two-pronged approach, as I said, is very much needed because I'm sure it's true of all countries which have RTI commissions, information commissions. Most of them are dysfunctional right now because they haven't even started, doing video conferencing or online conference. India's just started it, I think, the Chief Information Commission, but the state information commissions are dysfunctional. The same can be said for the State Human Rights Commission or even the National Human Rights Commission is not. So the mandate holders are not functional at this time when they, like the press is visible. The press is doing its job as much as it can, good, bad, indifferent. But the others have sort of fallen off the map. And this is the time they need to be out there as well. And we need to push for that. I wondered if anybody else, I have to close the questions here, but I wondered if Rajdeep and others have points they'd like to close with, and I want to hand it over to Mr. Fault if he's still there in Paris before we wrap up.
Sanjay, I just wanted to make two quick points, and this is particularly in response to the last panel that you had on fake news. I think we need to recognize that we live in a hyper-polarized world, including newsrooms, and B, that we live in an increasing era of creeping authoritarianism. And this is true across governments. Governments increasingly do not want to hear bad news. Governments increasingly do not want to be called into account. And they believe that because journalists are so divided at the moment, because we are in a hyper-polarized world, it is possible to use one set of journalists as a propaganda weapon to sort of as a megaphone for the government, and then target the others using social media, which is, of course, the new beast in the jungle, to act as their, should I say, their hound dogs, who then take on the media. So it's a very dangerous situation. Let's not, minimize that is what this polarization and creeping authoritarianism is doing. We are talking about a pandemic, and even in a pandemic, the government doesn't want to hear bad news. They are reluctant to hear any kind of news that brings them to account. So I think we have to be conscious of the fact that more than ever before, therefore, we need to return to, and therefore it's an opportunity for good media to return to what news was meant to be, which is a service. Not use news to sort of wage communal propagandas, use news to sort of act as government mouthpieces. I think this is a critical juncture. If we don't use this opportunity of a pandemic to restore public faith or trust in the media, to sort of question the fake news, to sort of bust fake news, we never will get a chance like this. And therefore I think we are at a critical juncture where obviously we are moving much more to online. Digital is becoming more important, but also I think this is the last chance we have to restore our credibility with viewers and ensure that news is a service. So I think we should be conscious with the forces that are ranged in a way against the media today on World Press Freedom Day. While we salute our journalism and our journalists, I think we have to be conscious that the forces that are ranged against us have no time for the principles of journalism or the ethics of journalism. They want to, in some way or the other, browbeat or compromise journalists like never before. And now they have weapons available to them which they never had in the past because of this proliferation of social media, these troll armies, and advertisements at times as well. Let's be honest, that is also a weapon that's used by governments. And we are finding this all across state government, center. Authoritarianism is a big problem, and as is the polarization, which is also one of whose ugly manifestations is the communalization. Now, if you communalize a pandemic, or as we saw recently, communalize a criminal act in Palghar, then God help this country.
No, I think you've really said it all there, Rajdeep, and I think all of us are on this side, on that side, shall we say. I don't know if anybody wishes to add anything. I think that's been actually a beautiful summing up of many issues and goes to the heart of the question. Anybody with any thoughts?
Just to say one line, it's not left versus right, it's right versus wrong. I think we need to avoid getting into this left versus right trap and just call it right versus wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it is essentially we do our work as professionals and we do the right thing. And speak truth to power, compassion for the weak, and call out the fake. Anybody else with quick thoughts, or if Mr. Falk is still there, I could go to him.
Sanjoy, can I please take leave because a storm is brewing up, a very bad storm, and I need to take a break and switch off all my.
You are talking about actual storm. Okay.
Actual storm, yeah. I need to switch off all my television and gadgets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. I think that's a good sign for us also to probably come to a close in this. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everybody. Mr. Fault, are you still there?
No, sir. No, he isn't.
He isn't. So that's fine. I mean, because I think one of the key issues that the UNESCO will be engaging with, since they deal with media, freedom of expression and information, will be, the funding of media systems, frankly. They need to look at that. They will be looking at that. They are looking at that. The
Sanjay,
UN system is looking at it.
Please.
Sorry,
Sanjay, I would like to make one point, please.
Is that Sandeep?
Yeah. The problem is there's an issue with the IFJ leadership also. So we got to really look at it again. There was a time when we were all involved with it, maybe till the mid 90s. After that, it is boiled down to a handful of people speaking on our behalf. And most of them, if you check, have not done any journalism for 15, 20 years. So we got to have really credible voices, like voices that are in SAMDEN, you, Kanak Mani, Mehfooz and Mr. Lopez. We need people like that in IFJ also to really drive media credibility. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, Simon, originally the thought when we started it was that this is the group which actually we do not need somebody from the West telling media in Asia or Africa, okay, you guys, you're at risk, we'll help you. We have faced the risk. We have faced the brunt. We have faced arrest and violence and threats and so on. We should mobilize ourselves, not depend on somebody else to do it for us. So I think the integrity of SAMDEN and the strength of it comes from that. I don't know if Kanak is there and if he wants to say one thing, and then I'll close with one story. Kanak, are you there?
No, he isn't. Oh yeah, he just joined, I think. Yeah, he just joined again.
Okay, Kanak, if you're back, can you? We are wrapping up. Would you like to share some closing thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I'm glad I got back in. I feel leaving the topic of migration, just going into issues of media freedom on Media Freedom Day. Firstly, once again, I want to recall Bina Sarwar's very poignant message to us, where she alerted us to the media workers, journalists of Pakistan who are under so much threat, which we tend to neglect in the rest of South Asia because of the media coverage from all over. We tend to forget how much stress the media, the journalists in Pakistan tend to be. So I'm glad that that got highlighted, given that we do not have a Pakistani journalist other than Bina out in the US at this point. Now, my reference, I would like to speak about job security and work security. Job security is threatened because the media world is going through a churning, as everybody has talked about, and the legacy media is weakened. The online media is there, but its economics of online media is not clear. In the meantime, social media has taken over. In Nepal, as I'm sure elsewhere, so many editors and opinion makers have started now becoming influenced by social media. So the opinion making function of editors and opinion makers has been abdicated to social media. And there's so much trolling going on that people get intimidated and they do not speak what's on their minds. So for all these reasons, I think there is a problem of uh, job security. Secondly, work security has to do with the fact that the physical security of a journalist, mental peace of mind, protection of one's life and limb, all of that is challenged right now. And I would like to make a special reference to journalists in the what we call the mufassil, journalists who work in the vernacular or language media at the ground level. I feel we are not sensitive enough to so much pressure for journalists away from the capitals and away from the metropolis, and in particular those who work close to the ground, which leads to an incredible deafening self-censorship. I feel that we need to keep that in mind as well. Kumar referred to media, the credibility of media in the opinion poll that he mentioned, and television comes out on top. I believe that television actually has had a rebound in Nepal as well, because for many years we had load shedding, so people tuned off television. But let me make a point which is with particular reference to Nepal in relation to the rest of South Asia. A recent poll indicated that radio is seen as the most credible source in Nepal. That is because in Nepal, FM radio networks have the right to present uh, current affairs and news, editorial independence to do that. As a result, I would say that why is Nepal different category than the rest of South Asia? Is because of the ability to do news and current affairs. That might be worth looking at. And finally, I'll end now. Let me just say that let we are all over South Asia, Sanjoy. We are quite embarrassed by television programming, news television programming of North India. It's an embarrassment not only to journalists of India, but journalists all over South Asia. And we are, and I do hope that none of us take as exemplary the kind of coverage, including during the COVID-19 crisis, done by individual anchors in the North Indian press, who, of course, I will not go on to name right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanak, and thank you for that, warning shot across the bows as we close. I know we are half an hour behind schedule, but I think it's been a terrific conversation. I want this to continue. I recognize the fact that there is a great among us. I'm not talking about the participants, bless them, but there is a great hunger and need among us to connect to each other, listen to our stories, be much more robust in our interactions with each other, because at the end of the day, when you are limited in movement, limited in assembly, limited in information gathering and expression, we have to turn to the best in the business or reliable sources in the business to cross-check facts and put them out. I mean, ultimately, we are also sources of information, because if we get information that we trust, we can share it with others. And I will just close with these 4 points and one story. I request just a minute or two of your time. One is that I believe we should all call for the freedom and release of journalists who've been in custody for whatever reason. And this is not either the time of the COVID pandemic when people should be in prison, and people who are in the front line of providing news should be out. Secondly, I think we need a dropping of defamation, especially criminal defamation cases are something which come from an earlier era. It's been something that we've all been struggling against for many years, but it is area I want to flag. The third thing is what Kanak spoke about, what we call the Mofasil, the rural-based and small-town-based journalists in the local communities who are facing maximum pressure. We can, in a way, protect ourselves. And so those, in why SAMDEN was created, is basically to support those in rural areas, get their voices heard, get protection as well as solidarity. And it is through credibility that we will have a credible, what Mahfouz and I spoke about, Amitabh and also Sandeep. It is credibility that is our social capital. And that is the capital which has to drive the future of print and certainly television, media, and online. Governments like hearing good news stories, so do we. So I'll end with one. Some of you may know that in the state of Assam, I started many years ago an initiative called the Boat Clinics. So the Boat Clinics of Assam on the Brahmaputra, it started with one in 2005 with a small amount of money, an award that we had won. And that has nothing to do with my present incarnation, Avatar. It is the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research, which I founded 20 years ago and works only in the Northeast, largely. It goes out, these are boat clinics, which are country-made boats, country vessels, which I've designed and we have built in Assam. There are 15 of them. They reach about 4 to 5 lakh people with health care, especially pregnant women or women who've delivered, as well as children, but also the general public. Assam has the worst maternal mortality ratio in Assam. If you're pregnant, a young woman who's pregnant in a rural area in Assam, it's the most dangerous place to be. But that has improved by more than 100% in the past 15 years. Not just because of us, but because health care has improved. But the story is very simple. Last week, a child was born, nothing new in that, but the child was born on a country boat, an open country boat. And the child was born safe because our team happened to be nearby when they got a distress call. They went, and it was an open boat, small boat. The doctor discovered the woman was going into labor and would deliver. They put out clean sheets, and within 20 minutes, a child was born. These are young people, young doctors and others in my team who go and deal with the pandemic every day. Okay? There are 200 and plus of them. I'm very proud of them. I'm safe. All of us are safe where we are. But these people have been in the front line. And it's good to remember that out of great courage comes also great stories. So thank you all for being with me and with all of us from SAMDEN and CHRI. A big shout out to all of you. Thank you. And we look forward to being with you and to continuing this conversation, because quite apart from the 300 others who are listening to us, or more or less, we need to also talk to each other and be together at this time. Thank you and bye. Thanks, everybody. It's good to see you all again.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the Sunday.
Bye.
Pleasure meeting you all. Thank you for the opportunity,
Bye.
Sanjay.
See you all soon. Bye.
Aditya, thank you as well for the coordination.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely. Thank you, Aditya, for making it possible. Thank you all, my dear friends.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sanjay. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
ठीक है भाई वन आ जा के अरे